Yo, how's it going everybody? You got Sketch here and welcome back to the channel. On this episode we're checking out one of Namco's most controversial franchises that was an homage to 80s horror and a jaw-dropping platformer that was one of the most graphic games to release to arcades at the time. We're looking at Splatterhouse, developed and published by Namco, released to arcades in 1988. This is one of those horror games that we almost didn't get in the States until home ports were released on the TurboGrafx 16, which was heavily censored. This entry would spawn 2 sequels, a remake, and a spin-off for the Famicom, but we'll focus on the original for this video. And the story goes a bit like this. Rick and his girlfriend Jennifer seek shelter from a storm and stumble upon the West Mansion, where it is rumored to be the site of numerous grotesque experiments. Once they enter, the door slams behind them and Jennifer screams as she is abducted. Rick wakes up in a dungeon and he's been fused to the Terror Mask, transforming him into a Goliath with superhuman strength. The mask directs Rick to destroy the monsters and rescue Jennifer while uncovering the mysteries of the mansion. Gameplay-wise, you've got a 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up where you'll stay on one single plane, punching and kicking enemies into the Shadow Realm. There's a slide maneuver that I couldn't pull off where you jump kick into a slide kick, and it looks effective if you can get the inputs right. You've also got a few weapons in each stage, ranging from cleavers, wooden planks, harpoons, and a shotgun. There's 7 stages in total, and this game does not mess around when it comes to difficulty, but we'll get to that soon enough. Enemies come at you pretty often, and in the latter half of the run they will bombard the screen in overwhelming numbers if you don't dispatch them quick. While there's a little bit of knockback when you're hit, there aren't many one-hit death pits to fall into. However, you don't get a lot of invincibility frames, so you can soak up damage quickly if you're unlucky, and dying will take you back to a checkpoint or the beginning of the stage once you run out of lives. Keep in mind there are no health pickups during stages. When you complete stages, you will get 1 additional hit point back. There's also an electrical barrier that moves from the left to the right of the screen, which will kill you if you don't keep moving, and enemies will shamble at you in some pretty decent numbers, hoping to stop your momentum. There's a variety of enemies to defeat, and they're all fairly interesting. There's a lot of ghouls and monsters in the mansion, and there's a lot of hidden dangers that lurk in the West Mansion too. Chairs, oh man. Chairs will be an enemy here, and these things can smack you silly at times until you figure out their movement. But the chair is one of the most surprisingly ruthless enemies in the game, believe it or not. The platforming is tough in spots since there are branching paths giving you either a slightly easier or harder route that lead to the same boss encounter. Even when you think the encounter is over, several bosses will let off one last attack, and if you die here, you have to do the entire boss fight over again. Boss fights will be tense, and you'll need to hit big characters as much as you can to end them quickly. The boss from stage 3 will absolutely give you that work unless you punch lock him or do the double shotgun trick. While the shotgun only appears in stage 3, the trick here will be to pick up and drop 2 shotguns as you walk towards the end of the level while sweep kicking enemies on the ground. If you can manage to get to the encounter with at least 12 shots, you can clear this boss pretty quickly. Stages 5 through 7 are where the game hits a hard difficulty spike, with stage 5 being a long one with several paths to take. Once getting to the boss encounter here, you'd think the game was over since you fight what you think is Jennifer, but it's a demon in disguise. Jennifer has a wide reach and can drain your life bar quickly if she connects. While it may seem tempting to spam attacks here, this will quickly get you smoked. You have to knock her back to get to a safe distance, otherwise you will die. And if you fail this encounter, you have to run the whole of stage 5 over again. Graphics wise, Splatterhouse runs on Namco's System 1 hardware and was a step beyond the games that were programmed for it at the time. While the system hardware powered games like Dragon Spirit, Galaga 88, and Pac-Mania, Splatterhouse was easily one of the most controversial games amongst their catalog. If you want to have a bit of fun while playing this, you can make a bingo card with the numerous horror references. While Splatterhouse was being developed, enemies were depicted as being a bit more realistic until Namco higher-up stepped in, saying that if we're going to ship this game, enemies have to look a lot less realistic. Western arcades rarely got this cabinet, along with 1986's Chiller, which was another violent arcade game that wasn't seen much in American arcades until console ports were released later on. The stage intros even open up with doors exploding, showing a preview of where you'll be next in the West Mansion and the amount of health you've got to start. Once the screen fades in, you're off to vanquish the terrors within. The presentation here is pretty slick considering how subtle they are at times, and as the game progresses, it only gets more gnarly. There are a lot of references from Western slasher movies to sci-fi horror flicks with a lot of gore in the mix to boot. A few of them are pretty obvious, like the Terror Mask in Friday the 13th, the aliens that resemble chestbursters, and Evil Dead with a shotgun and stage 3 boss with chainsaw arms, and Reanimator, which is referenced by the mansion. It does get pretty spicy off with paranormal furniture, various shambling creatures, and specters that can resurrect the dead enemies until you take them out. Living up to the name, you'll splatter enemies all about the game, especially when you get a wood plank and smash enemies into the walls behind you. Cleavers lop the heads clean off enemies, and the harpoon briefly lets you reenact the final scene of Jaws where you plunge them through a few zombies. The imagery overall is pretty gross through most of the game, and it's truly interesting how much of a shift this was for Namco. While they did dabble with some of their games having mature themes, this swings for the fences fairly early on in their arcade division. Stage designs are pretty sick, and in a lot of instances will push you through the stage, going through a variety of environments including several underwater sections where ghouls pop up out of the water while spiked mines and debris float along the path. There's a lot of detail in each level section, like the crashing lightning and rain in outdoor areas, to the lights on windows moving back and forth when spirits travel through it. Sections often house piles of failed experiments and remains strewn about the stages, and once you get to the womb of the mansion, the background looks like the alien hive from Contra, spawning enemies on the floor and ceiling as you make your way to the core. The final stage is you escaping from the burning mansion, where flaming logs and enemies jump and roll your way. The pattern here is going to make you jump, but since attacking is basically useless until the boss, you'll be threading the needle through enemies and logs, all of which will damage you. The bosses are insane, and a few of these are some pretty evil looking creations, like the inverted cross surrounded by disembodied floating heads, the West Mansion womb that explodes once defeated, and the final boss which spits hot asphalt and tries to crush you with his giant hands. The designs are buck, and they're done in a way that you might recognize some of the sources, but are gnarly creations at the same time. Sound-wise, Splatterhouse shreds with its audio work and soundtrack. The collaborative efforts of Katsuro Tajima, Yoshinori Kawamoto, and Yuichiro Komoriya cook up a soundtrack that's a love letter to horror movie scores. The music absolutely smokes in Splatterhouse, and has a solid balance of eerie brass instruments and organs to synth stabs of classic slasher movie sequences. The theme of Stage 5 and parts where you fight Shadow Rick is an absolute belter, and when it kicks off, you know something big is ahead. The range of the soundtrack is varied, with more ominous slow building tunes to more intense tracks that give the feel of the chase. In-game audio is hauntingly good, with each impact having a surprising amount of bass to it. The sound is pretty crispy here, from thrashing parasites to the splash of the underwater catacombs. The shrieks and groans of downed enemies almost create a parallel harmony with the background music at times. There's a few sound effects in here that are genuinely startling, like the final stage where the blazing enemies almost have a roar effect, for example. There's a bit of speech synth here too, so this has a little bit of everything and does it all fairly well. Splatterhouse is an awesome beat-em-up platformer hybrid that's dope if you can get past the difficulty, which spikes pretty heavily in parts. The brutal journey of Rick is a memorable one, since parts of it are so out there it's hard to forget. It was a bold move for Namco developing and releasing this beast into arcades, and doing so created a legacy of horror titles. While this is a game that forces you to figure out how to progress, it's a bloody good time in the process. Splatterhouse gets an 8 out of 10 and comes recommended to horror game fans and beat 'em up fans, as this game is sick even with its difficulty in parts. This would have been an awesome one to see in arcades back in the day, but it makes sense considering not much was quite this gnarly yet. The Splatterhouse games are a good one to run through every so often if you're looking for a gory, challenging brawler platformer. The TurboGrafx-16 version will release a couple years later in the western region, and it made numerous design changes to avoid potential copyrights, and significantly toned down the violence and religious references. The series will continue for a while on the Sega Genesis and Mega Drive, and I hope to eventually cover these two if I can find a copy. While these are unlockable in the Splatterhouse 2010 remake, there were some changes made in those versions, though it remains one of the easier ways to play the trilogy all in one place. Otherwise, it's available on the Nintendo Switch through the arcade archives, and unlockable on the Splatterhouse 2010 remake for the PS3 and Xbox 360. And I thank you again if you made it this far into the video. If you found these videos helpful, that's awesome. I'm glad you use it as a resource. Check back often, we'll have more reviews and commentaries come up in the near future. But until then, take it easy and stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.